what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Pair Program, this show that brings together two technologists from the startup world to tackle topics at the intersection of technology and career growth. I'm your host, Tim Winkler, my co-host, Mike Gruen. Let's get into it. Becca, Johnny, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So as you know, this is the Pair Program. We like two of everything here. So let's just kick things off with a few pairing hot takes. I'll begin. Something that takes me back to my childhood. Used to love always putting together macaroni and cheese with ketchup. Not your normal mixing, but at the same time adds a little bit extra flavor to that or hot sauce. But ketchup tends to be something that I've always thrown in just to add flavor. Has anybody partaken in this before?
Sounds terrible.
Absolutely not.
I need a different source of flavor, maybe. Ketchup feels lazy.
Yeah,
Ketchup feels lazy. Oh, I like it.
You can't go wrong. Mike, let me guess. What are you going to go with?
So, in honor of the T-shirt I'm wearing, my Joan Jett and the Black Hearts T-shirt. For those watching the video, I'm going with female vocalists and punk or metal music. I'm a big Riot Girl fan, and I think it's an underrated genre, and there's just something to it.
Solid.
Respect.
Thanks.
Johnny, what you got?
I'm going to go safe, peanut butter and jelly. And the only reason is because I have a really dark sense of humor and I really want this to be able to be played out loud at someone's office. So I'm just going to stick there.
I like it. You going crunchy or creamy?
Definitely creamy.
Creamy peanut butter.
Creamy is really the only option.
That's the only option.
Yeah.
Becca, how about yourself?
Mine feels a little random, although maybe less random after what Mike shared. Mine is actually Miley Cyrus and cover songs. So I'm a huge Miley Cyrus fan. Her original songwriting could use some work, but I think she does some amazing covers. Especially some rock covers. So yeah, big fan of that.
Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I would say recently the one that's been getting a lot of airtime is her cover with Metallica of Nothing Else Matters. It's really good. She's got this deeper voice now, which is, I think, a perfect fit for that. But also really like earlier this year, she did Zombie, which is just phenomenal. And going back a bit further, a version of Summertime Sadness by Lana Del Rey, which, again, she just nails it. So
yeah, it's classic. Did she ever do a Joan Jett cover?
I think she actually featured Joan Jett on her last album.
Okay.
Don't hold me to that.
Yeah.
Like a music critic podcast.
We're gonna need our producers to fact check that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think so.
Good stuff. All right, deja vu. All right, we're gonna stream right into the actual meat of the episode here. So, on today's episode, we're going to be dissecting the unique relationship between product teams and engineering teams within startup environments. A lot to unwrap here, and to be honest with you, it's such a broad topic that we'll likely have several follow-up episodes on this subject alone. Given we only have about 40 minutes here, I thought it made sense to keep it a little bit more higher level. We can start by just defining some of the roles here, and Johnny, you'll take our engineering perspective. Becca, take our product perspective. Johnny, let's start with you. How do you define the role of the engineering team, where that kind of plays within the startup?
Yeah. So, I mean, as you might imagine, not all startups are, equal. You have everything from, pre-series A, just, maybe 20 people to, like Series D, quote unquote, startups. But I think that, if you take Till, for example, we're still pretty early in our life cycle. And so I think that engineers are probably best thinking about, the how. Not to say that there's a border and a hard line between product and engineering in terms of what versus how. But I think that if you hire the right folks, then they'll be very, very focused on how to solve your problems. Bringing problems to the table is probably going to be best suited for engineering teams, and just kind of giving them the autonomy and the latitude to kind of solve those problems, given whatever constraints you have. We're never doing anything in a vacuum, but I think that's probably, the best way to think about it moving forward.
Becca, how do you feel, I guess, the product team, where that plays in?
Yeah, I would say it's similar in terms of like it varies a lot depending on the type of organization. And I think, Johnny's point's a good one around stage. I also think it really depends on just your leadership and in some cases, kind of your founding team, right? And I think the thing with product that's really challenging is you have some leaders that bring in product teams and really empower them to figure out what what to build. And then I think you have a lot of leadership out there that has a very strong idea of that themselves. And so I think that can really influence kind of what role the product team plays and how much they spend time on discovery work and really talking to users and understanding what to build, and not just what, but sometimes like why. I think that's an important part of it too. Versus getting pulled more into the how, like Johnny said, and really just working a lot more with the engineering team on the specifics of the solution. And so I think sometimes that can create, if you have leadership that's spending too much time in that area, that can kind of like condense everybody in the how. And I think that's where things can get a little bit tricky. Because then I think you sometimes get product teams that function a little bit more in that like project management space versus kind of what I would call like real product, doing more of that discovery work. So yeah, it can be very fluid.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about it, right, both teams are working together like collaboratively to solve basically, we're trying to produce the product. We're building the thing that's going to, drive revenue. And so they work together, and then where those lines are, who's responsible for design, like UI design or graphic design or whatever, maybe not graphic, but and then who's responsible for like user experience and flow, and then the why and the how and all that, and then you add in sort of leadership, like executive level. There's visionary leaders who they know what they want built, and now it's really product's job to sort of take that vision, and it's more of an execution mindset of how to take that vision out of the founder's head or the leader's head and sort of communicate that effectively to the engineering team in a way that is not too specific or whatever. And I think, depending on the stage, depending on the people that you have in the organization, there's just a lot of flow. And I think that's where there's the most conflict, is when like you have a visionary leader and a visionary product person, and now they're just bumping heads all the time rather than maybe pairing things up. Or similarly, a really technical product manager who really does understand the like how, working with an engineer who's like, stop telling me how to do my job. I know what I'm doing. Just tell me what problem I need to solve. And that's usually where the conflicts arise, is when there's two people with very similar skill sets trying to solve the same problem in different ways or not, and it can be collaborative. That it doesn't have to be a hostile conflict. It could be a collaborative conflict, if you will, but healthy tension and friction. But I think that's sort of how I think about it. I'm curious, you guys, I just sort of preached there for a little bit, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
No, I think that's really spot on. I mean, especially when you start to drill down and thinking about the individual, right? I've worked with some product managers who were like so technical. If you didn't know they were a product manager and just listen to them talk about certain aspects of the product, like they sound like they could be an engineer, right? And vice versa. Some engineers are so product minded, it's not until they actually start talking about code that you realize, oh, they're a software engineer. They're not actually part of sort of like the product team. And so sometimes there's a mismatch there, right? Where you have more of a product minded software engineer who is expecting certain things from the product person who is maybe just more on the technical side, maybe doing more of a project management job. And so neither one of them are really getting what they want. And so there could be a little bit of tension there, but they're both really good at their jobs, just like not quite a good alignment of skill sets.
Would you say like, as far as engineers go, it's easier to find, front end engineers that are going to be more product minded than like, back end engineers that are a little bit more behind the scenes, not as product savvy, or is it kind of across the board?
I hesitate to say that only because, and this is just based on my experience. Um, I could see why, that would be something that a lot of people would think.
Mhm.
But I don't know, maybe I'm just like really fortunate to just know some of the engineers that I know. But I know like back end engineers who like, wrangle data all the time, who are very, very in tune with the product and what it's doing, who it's what problems it's trying to solve, who are the personas. Like these are like very good conversations to have with these particular folks. But also like, some front engineers, particularly if they're like more on the junior side, they may not have a strong grasp on the product problem to be solved, but they know the specific tasks in the project that they're working on. And so I could see a correlation as people get more maybe senior in their career, but I don't see that play out maybe nearly as acutely as other people do.
I 100% agree. I don't think it has to do with where you are in the stack as much as where you are in your career. I'm curious,
Mhm.
Becca, if you would also agree with that, or feel free to fight me. That's fine.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, in my experience, at Procurated right now, we have a team of full stack engineers, and I would say that their like willingness and enthusiasm to be involved in the product development process and working so closely with the product team is more about just kind of personality and also like who we hire for. I think we're very intentional to find we don't really want to hire an engineer that's like, oh, I'm good, just kind of tell me what to do and I'll go do it. Like we want a team that will think really critically about what we're building and is it the right thing for us to be building. And so I think, it really depends on whether or not you're intentional about that when you're hiring.
I think that's actually a great point. I think that's something that is pretty common in the growth, when you're looking startups and growth stage companies, is that's the type of people you're looking for, especially early on, is who can sort of bridge that. And I think I'm curious, Becca, like what's your experience like? So with the sort of conflict that sort of inherently comes from that, because now you have a product person saying, hey, this is the problem I think that we should be solving. Here's and then you have engineers who maybe don't agree with that and think that, and so now you can sort of see where this can get a little tension. And I'm curious, especially at a growth stage, what your experience with that is.
Yeah, I would say my like hot take on all of that, if I can brand it that way, is that I think the thing that people don't acknowledge that often is like that friction is actually a really good thing. And it is so much easier. Like if you have these perfectly defined roles and it's like you do this and you do that. And like we all just kind of like hand things off, build what somebody tells us to build. Like that's easier, like 100%. I think, but I don't think you can actually build innovative products that way. And so I think like where the good stuff happens is where there's that overlap where you do have product and engineering thinking about the problem and like really challenging one another on it. And I think that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. And that's why people sometimes shy away from it because it is easier to just not do that. But I think that that's not how you get to the right answer.
And I think part of that is, and I agree, because when I think of, I've drawn this diagram almost every company I've worked at to sort of describe like engineering and products relationship, and then products relationship with the rest of the company, which is product and engineering are like two cogs that have to like sort of intermesh. For those who are just listening and can't see my hands, I apologize. But then you have, and then product also has like all these rubber bands, if you will, or whatever you want to call them, to the belts to the rest of the organization, because there also has to be tension with sales and marketing, and that's what's going to make the engine flow. Yep. But right, it's that friction, that healthy friction between engineering and product that really make everything work. And I think I totally agree with the like you can't build anything really meaningful if in a way if nobody's being challenged, and there's no challenge. I think part of that, and it's something I hire for, is open-mindedness and the idea that like we're just trying to solve a problem. We're just pitching ideas. It's not my idea. It's not your idea. We're just trying to build better ideas on top of what each other's doing. And I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah, I feel like personality traits are something that you got to kind of dial in on, right? If you hire up maybe engineers that are looking for that power struggle and less inclined to collaborate or get direction from product at times, it could be that bad friction that you want.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree.
For context, I'm curious, Becca, what is the size of Procurated and the size of the engineering teams and the product teams from a headcount?
Yeah. So right now we're around 25 people total. And we have 4 engineers, 2 product managers, and a UX designer that are kind of all working together pretty closely.
And is there like a chief technology officer, or was the founder technical in nature, or I guess how did that form?
It's actually a great question. So the short answer is no. Our founder is his experience is kind of in our industry, in the world of public procurement. And when he hired me, I was actually the first person brought on board. And that was very meaningful to me to know that the first hire at the organization would be someone product focused. And so initially, when we got started, we were actually working with a team of engineers that we were contracting with, which worked out really well because we were co-located in a WeWork space. And so like it wasn't maybe that typical relationship where we were like throwing things over the fence to them. Like it was probably more collaborative than most contractor relationships might be. And then we kind of just hired and built our own team out of that. So one of our engineers, she moved over from that contract team to join our team, and then have just hired our kind of full stack, mid to senior level engineers to round out that team. So we actually don't really have anyone at the leadership level of the company that is, has an engineering background. So I think it's a bit of a unique setup, but has worked for us. We're in the process right now of starting to recruit for a director of engineering, because I do think that it's important to, have that technical voice at the leadership level, and just someone that can be a great manager for our current team. So that's happening now. But yeah, I think we're kind of unique in how we evolved in staffing out that team.
So you were the first hire on the technical team was a product hire.
Yeah.
Johnny, what about your situation at Till?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. We're about 34, 35-ish people today. By the time people listen to this, engineering team will be at 12 people, I think. Product, it'll be at 4 folks, I think, at that point. Let's see. When I first came on board, there were a few people there. We hadn't hired anyone on the product side yet. And so we kind of grew engineering first, kind of, a little bit of the opposite. Actually took us a long time to find a really good product manager, like a long time, way longer than we wanted to. And so we started with engineers who were like very product focused and wanted to sort of like have a voice at that table. And so that's kind of where we grew our strength there. So we have pretty strong product minded engineers. And then we eventually did find our current VP of product, Karen Ellenberger, and was able to kind of grow a product organization based on her leadership. And so we eventually did get there, but it was by way of growing the technical side first and then bringing on product as we were able to do so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how hard it is to find a really good product person. I think that's, especially head of product, I think that's a theme throughout my career. Not to say that I've worked with great ones. I've worked with, some others that haven't maybe been as great. It's definitely a challenge. I think it's a challenging role. I'm curious, Becca, like how do you sort of define success? Like how do you know if you're being successful in product? Like in engineering, it's a little bit easier. In sales, it's a little easier. I feel like product, it's a harder role. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
What's interesting is you described that. I started to think a little bit about almost this like chicken and egg problem of, I think part of the reason it's hard to find good product people is that sometimes the people hiring for that role don't actually know like what that means, right? Or like what kind of product person would be a good fit for their role. And, it's they're within the product function. I think product leaders have lots of different strengths. You do have those product leaders, I think, that have really great fundamentals when it comes to the discovery work and, user research and kind of testing and that kind of thing. And then you have product leaders that maybe have been closer on kind of the build side of things and are a little bit more just like used to working very closely with engineering teams. And so yeah, I think there's so much variance that and I think that's part of, if you're interviewing as a product person looking for a leadership role, having a level of self-awareness to know kind of where you fall on that spectrum and therefore what a good fit would be for you. And then like really asking smart questions about that during an interview process. And, even if there's a company that you're super excited about and really want to work for, just being honest with yourself of like, are you the right kind of product person for that company based on kind of your assessment of what that organization really needs? But yeah, I think there is a lot of like self-awareness that is required on all parts to really find that right fit.
I think that's an excellent point. I actually, as you were talking, I was even thinking back over like the product managers who maybe I thought were not as good, but it really is that they were just not as good a fit. We had a visionary CEO who wanted to find a visionary product person because he wanted to defer the vision, but it was like, no, that's not right. What we need is a different type of product manager, a different type of head of product. And I think, so yeah, I'd like to retract my earlier statement. Maybe it was just more about mismatch as opposed to how good or bad they were at their job, and more about how good or bad they were fitting the organization and the organizational needs. I think that's a excellent point, and about self-awareness.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think Becca hit the nail on the head. One of the things we talked about super early on at Till when we were thinking about this, sure, it was a matter of like, what makes a good product manager, but, product managers have been different at every company I've been at. And so the thing that we really honed on was, what makes a good product manager at Till, right? What does a Till product manager look like? Like what does success look like for that person? And it's so different at all the different organizations, depending on, how technical you need folks to be, to kind of, to Becca's point, or visionary or strategic. And companies with multiple different products, you need like different types of product managers to kind of, build out those products, right? Sometimes if it's a more established product, maybe you just need someone to kind of just keep the ship going, right? Or if it's someone who's like literally building out a new market, right? You need that more visionary strategic hire to be able to kind of go out and sort of, build in that greenfield. So it's highly use case dependent.
Right. Yeah, we've spoken to a guest on the podcast previously who's a product leader, and he's very dialed in from the seed to Series A stage. Like that's his sweet spot, and he knows that a good product person isn't too is very aware of knowing when to fire themselves, almost of like going to the leadership and saying, "Look, we've already found product market fit. I was really dialed in here. We're doing user research. You need somebody different at this next stage." And it's no hard feelings. It's not like, I couldn't maybe do the job, but there's somebody that really knows how to do it at that stage that's going to be better than me. And that was an interesting spot, because I feel like that is a very unique use case tied to a role, like product management role.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the same applies in engineering as well. I think there's engineers who really hit a sweet spot, like at an early stage company, who have this sort of capability of doing everything, and they really enjoy that sort of full coverage type stuff and the sort of get it done. And then, as the organization grows, your needs change. And I think that that's an important part, whether you're in engineering or product or wherever you are in a small company as it grows, that at some point, the role that you most enjoy might not really be there, or the role that you're best suited for might not really be at the company anymore, because there's just new needs now, right? They don't need that. But I think that self-awareness, super important.
Yeah.
So as far as like roles being defined, it's safe to say, I guess, product managers kind of equal the why and the what, engineering team, kind of the how, the product team serving as a way to empower like the engineering team to understand why they're building what they're building and who they're helping. But how about, how that all comes together, collaboration tips on, what works, what doesn't work, any specific examples that come to mind that have worked really well for you all in terms of getting the two teams to mesh, if it be, certain, daily stand-ups or whatever it is, tools that you've used?
One thing I would throw out there is we do OKRs as an organization. That's kind of what we use quarterly to set our goals. And I think it's really important to make sure everyone is involved in that process. Because the way I think about it is like the longer you wait to like create that collaboration, the harder it is, because there's just certain decisions that can get made very early when thinking about how we prioritize and what we focus on that just kind of carry out. So I think the more that you can bring a broader group into that, like the OKR conversation and say, hey, as a team, what are the big picture objectives that we want to focus on this quarter? How do we want to tackle that? What are the big customer problems that really matter to us? And making sure that, product and engineering are really a part of that. I think that's really helped us with more of that like alignment and collaboration.
Nice. Mike, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of, with the OKRs is an important part. I think goals are great, right? Provided that we all agree, like these are the goals and we don't have too many of them and they're not at odds with each other. Because I think sometimes goals can also create things going in different directions and not getting that shared alignment. I think that's one of we sort of skipped over this, but I think that's one of the most important parts of product's job is, and Becky, feel free to correct me, I was only a product manager for a short period of time, is sort of communicating these are the company's objectives. This is what we're trying to get accomplished. This is the line in the sand. If the things that you think are important, aren't above this line, they're not going to get done. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like we've all agreed as a company, this is what our objectives are. And I think that's one of the most important roles of product is being able to effectively communicate why something is being done or why something maybe isn't being done. And goals is like the best medium for being able to communicate that. Like, how does this thing that you want to get done align with the goal that we all said at the beginning of the quarter we were going to work on? So I'm curious if that's sort of, because I think we sort of skipped that in terms of like one of the major roles of product is really communicating.
Yeah, that. I would agree. And I would add to that and say two other things. One, I think an important skill for anyone in product is the ability to say no in like a, polite and diplomatic way.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Get out.
And it's so hard. Like everybody is we're all people pleasers. And no one wants to say no, right. But it's a huge part of the job. And I think, but along with that, I think an important part of it is, to your point, frame it in the context of what the goals are. Like, does this really align and help us advance towards that goal? And two, just putting it in context. Like, I think it's very easy when you're evaluating an individual idea to be like, oh, yeah, this is a good idea or not. But there's lots of good ideas. And so that's the basics of prioritization is like, well, let's put all the good ideas together and then see like what's actually best. And I think sometimes a lot of people throughout the organization, whether it's like your engineering team or stakeholders or whoever, just don't have that context on like, what is the whole realm of things that we could do? And like, then think about the thing I want to do and like, realistically, where does that fall? So I think that's a big part of what product has to do is like, actually give that context on like what else is up for consideration and therefore how high of a priority is that request.
Reminds me of a Steve Jobs quote, one of my favorites I think it's something along the lines of looking back, I'm more proud of the things we decided not to do than the things we did do. Just because it is easy. There's lots of good ideas and it's really easy to let that stuff get you distracted.
Johnny, how have your teams collaborated between the product and engineering?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about tools and stuff, but I did want to sort of like hammer home. I think what Becca was saying about context is super important, and because when you're setting goals, right, in addition to setting really good goals, you have to agree on the things that around which you want to set goals. So metrics are really important. Like, what are you actually measuring, right? Before you can actually create goals around those. So that's especially for early stage startups. It's very easy to kind of go down the wrong road, just measuring the wrong thing and start building towards hitting goals for like the wrong metrics. And so that's super important in terms of, context and communication. We're big on asynchronous communication and not just really Slack, but like writing, right? Long form writing and setting that context. And the reason is because I think that as leaders, we're in context all the time. We're constantly talking about the context and the business and the market and what are users doing and whatnot. But, when you get down to, project folks and engineers, they're not necessarily in that context all the time. They're solving micro problems, making, tens of thousands of decisions every week. And, they kind of lose that context. And so you have to constantly reinforce this and let people know why they're building the things that they're building. And that's much easier to scale if you have it written down somewhere. One of the things I learned sort of like mid in my management career was that, when you're trying to convey context to folks, if you don't write it down, you're going to find yourself saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. And that context will never set in until you find yourself sick of saying it. And then you have to say it 3 more times. And then maybe the team gets it at that point. And it's not because you're necessarily doing a bad job. It's because, you do the big hoorah in the status meeting. Everybody goes out and build their stuff. 48 hours later, they're not even thinking about, the big speech you gave, right? You're still patting yourself on the back for, starting off the week, but, you're not even to Wednesday yet and everyone's forgotten about it, right? And so you have to constantly be able to reinforce that context in a scalable way. And so being able to write things down with the context is super important because it gives people opportunity to digest that information in whatever way is most optimal for them. Some people will get it right when you say it and they'll be good to go. Some people need to go read it, reread it, think about it, sleep on it, drink some coffee. And then they'll be like, oh, I have a really good question. And they'll bring that one key piece of insight that's really going to help transform the way you make decisions moving forward. But they needed that time to really process that. And you want to make sure you have an environment where those folks, have an opportunity to contribute.
And then you bring that to the next meeting. That's one thing we always find too is like, we're going to have a meeting, we have an agenda, document everything. The next meeting, like, okay, well, let's look back at the show notes from the last meeting, right? So where did we last leave off? What did we say was a good idea? What wasn't? Because if you don't document it, it's floating around, it's gone.
Yeah.
Nice. Again, just kind of being mindful of time, I guess. Any specific closing notes that we want to maybe touch on for this specific discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hop first and then and give our guests a chance to sort of think. But I think one of the big takeaways for me, or something I hadn't really thought about, was the idea of not bad product managers, but rather just bad fits. And it's I think that's a good takeaway for me at least, and making sure moving forward, we always try and hire the right people. I sort of inherently know that, but sort of framing it that way was definitely eye-opening, if you will. Little epiphany moment. So that was good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, the big thing for me was first, feels like we left a lot on the table. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah,
I feel like we really hit hard on like maybe 2 or 3 things. Yeah. But I mean, kind of to Mike's point, having, the right fit. And the other thing that I've kind of learned is that, this is not static, right? There's a time dimension, right? Someone who is a right fit at the very beginning, early stages, particularly in engineering, like that really talented full stack engineer who's not really an expert in anything, but can like do a bunch of stuff is going to be like your MVP, right? Until you get that fit, and then bringing in more specialized folks is super important. So you may talk to that specialized person very early on. They're super excited. about the mission. They really want to come on board, but you have to tell that person no simply because it's just not the right time. And so that could be very difficult as well. So that's something to kind of really take away with people. And so that's like a very hard thing to do because you want people who are aligned with your mission and, are really believing the same things that you are in terms of, your values and whatnot, but it just may not be the right time for that person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add, I think a lot of what we've discussed is kind of the like soft skills that make somebody a good fit, your level of self-awareness and things like that. The other piece of that, I think, is just looking for people that have genuine empathy for their colleagues. I think to me, that's the most important thing between a product and engineering relationship is like, if a product person doesn't really understand the challenges that come with an engineering role, and like the biggest thing that gets me sometimes is like having a lack of appreciation for how hard it is to estimate how long it takes to do things, which is silly because you think about it like, if you asked me to estimate how long it takes me to do anything, it would be wildly inaccurate, right? So why do we look at engineers and say like, well, this took more time than you expected? Like, of course it did. And so I think it's just like that perspective of really trying to understand like, what are the things that make an engineering role hard within this organization? And what are the things that make a product role hard? And I think if you can kind of remind yourself of those things, it creates just a much closer working relationship between those two functions, and just greater alignment towards whatever bigger picture goal you're working on, because it comes from a place of understanding.
I think on that alignment piece, I think that's an important part, and you sort of hinted at it, which is making sure there's also alignment between what is it that we as a product development organization, like what are some of the metrics or whatever that we want to prioritize, not from a goals perspective in terms of the product itself, but how we operate. Do we prefer speed or do we prefer predictability? Because we can be back to your estimate point, like I can give you very precise estimates if I'm given enough time to do all the research to figure out where all the gotchas are going to be, right? It's basically the halting problem. And by the time I'm done, done estimating, I've basically solved the problem. And now I can tell you, it's going to take me, whatever. But that's a very slow but predictable. And maybe that's what the organization needs. But maybe sometimes it's more about speed. And I think that's making sure there's alignment there is an important part between product and engineering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well said. I think it's unique too that we're getting some perspectives. I think a lot of what we're hearing is like from an early stage perspective. I'd be really interested in a follow-up episode to get somebody who's doing product at like Series D, and beyond, and see what kind of perspectives they have. But all in all, we could talk for hours about this, and let's kind of put a bow on it at this segment and jump into this next segment here. So we call this Round Out My Career. It's a fun session where we have this very colorful community wheel behind me. It has topics and questions that are crowdsourced from the hatchpad community. And these are topics that can range anywhere from compensation to diversity, and will be chosen randomly as the wheel spins. We do have a prize section here if we're lucky enough that if it lands on it, that one lucky member of the community will receive a free Raspberry Pi. So we'll go ahead and spin the wheel, see what we come up with. Communication. This is actually very relevant to the topic here.
I was prepared to cover this.
It's not rigged. Okay, so let's see here. So I guess it's kind of general, but communicating when asking for and receiving feedback. Any specific tips that you have found helpful when you're kind of going through this form of communication with asking for and receiving feedback? Johnny, if you want to tell me about some of your specific examples.
Yeah, I mean, So we have a set of engineering tenets internally, and the things that sort of like we value on the team in order to be able to work really well and effective together. And one of those things is sort of like very candid feedback, right? You know, obviously respect with everything. You know, you obviously want to respect your colleagues, but I find not much value in sort of like sugarcoating too much, because, people receive feedback very different ways. And some people will, unfortunately go out of their way not to receive critical feedback. And that's very easy to avoid cognitively if, it's sugarcoated too much. So I think being very honest with each other is probably the best way. It can be a bit uncomfortable in the beginning, but that's only until you actually build a relationship with the person communicating that feedback. And once that is established itself, it's much easier to do. And I think that as a team, we definitely value that, right? Because it allows us to kind of move much more quickly, right? I don't have to wonder what you think. You don't have to wonder what I think. We're very sort of like honest with each other, and it allows us to kind of move forward amicably in a way that allows us to be much more productive. So I'd say communication should be like pretty candid, always respectful, that sort of thing. But that's kind of what my advice would be.
Nice. Becca, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think candid is exactly right. The other word I would add is like consistent or continual, right? Like I think it's really important. There's kind of this old school mindset around like, oh, we wait for a annual performance review to give feedback, and like that doesn't benefit anyone. So one thing that we have done that I think has really helped us is in our one-on-ones that we do. That's just like a standard agenda item, is this mutual feedback. So I'm giving feedback to my direct reports and they're giving feedback to me. And I think part of what makes that great, one, is that you just, it doesn't have to be a production, right? It's just, hey, this is what we do every week when we meet for our one-on-ones, and it really normalizes it. And I think it makes folks really comfortable with the idea. And making it mutual, I think, is really important too, right? Because it can't just always be, hey, your manager kind of top down giving feedback. I think it's really important that that flows both ways. So yeah, that's something that we've done. I think that's really helped because it's kind of a muscle that I think people have to build and don't often have opportunities to do it. So yeah, that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, I mean, I totally concur with the mutual, because the fact is everybody can get better, everybody can learn, and everybody's growing in their job, in their role. If you're managing, you have to be able to learn from the people you manage on how to manage them better, or what you're doing, what's working for them. I think it doesn't not just from the growth perspective, which is the obvious benefit to yourself, but also on the being able to show, look, this is how one receives and provides critical feedback, makes it much easier for the other person to receive and give critical feedback. And I think that's a really important aspect. And I think it's something that I always, my one-on-ones, number of years ago, I started a very formal one-on-one, and that was first agenda item is any feedback they have for me, any feedback I have for them. I always like to let the other person go first. I totally agree. And I think the other part, to Johnny's point of like the candid, I think one of the things that really helps with candid feedback is establishing a rapport between people. Like it's really easy to like not like someone or be upset with someone if you don't really know them. But as you get to know someone, and I think that's an important part of that one-on-one and that feedback, is just getting to know people and knowing like, hey, generally speaking, people aren't malicious. And so just having that basic understanding of who they are, where they're coming from, a little bit of background, what else is going on in their life, gives you that empathy, gives you more insight, and then it just makes it easier to have those conversations, because it's just one of many conversations, as opposed to now I'm going to go into the principal's office and hear how I screwed up this week. So I think those are all important parts.
Yeah, that two-way feedback. Becca, you said you guys do weekly one-on-ones.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice.
Yeah,
that's. I think when you're that small, it's super effective. Right now, I think we we do weekly one-on-ones. They're a little bit more of like just casual, of like task focused, and then we'll do monthly, and then we'll have like more of like quarterly or semi-annual, like bigger one-on-ones. But one thing I thought was interesting too is, on the candid front, I think there's definitely value there. There's also value to confidential. For example, we finally got to a size where we're big enough where we can do like company surveys, but it's confidential, but it's not like you kind of know who said it. And so we started to do them, and I think that it's interesting, and it has pros and cons, because you've got job satisfaction, or you think the vision is clearly communicated to you. How would you rate this or that? And you maybe see like one that's just like a little bit of an outlier, but you don't know who it's from. And so we were like, well, how do we troubleshoot this? And so I think we make it very clear now of, if you chose 6 or below out of 1 through 10, are you willing to give us some suggestions or recommend some advice? And then separately, there's just an ongoing kind of like a suggestion box that you can throw at any time if you have an idea or if you think something could be done better. And I'm very clear too, whenever we do like all hands, we do like a monthly all hands of just kind of like being vulnerable. And like, this is my first time too, like leading a team of this size or growing a company to this point. This is all still uncharted territory. And so I will take any feedback you've got. Like, I'm not going to put a shield up and say like, well, no, I think you're wrong. I do it the right way. So I try to make myself vulnerable, and my team tends to relate to that of like, okay, he's kind of put his guard down. Like, he's not pretending like he does know everything. So
I think it's really important. Like, I think everything that we've described involves creating a safe place for that feedback. And it sounds simple, right? Like, but it's more than just like, oh, hey, you won't get fired for saying critical things. Like, it's going beyond that and really encouraging it and making sure that people feel like, that's what the organization wants, and that's what will make us all better. But it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thanks for hanging out with us, Johnny, Becca. I think your perspective has been super helpful on this whole product meets engineering concept. I'm sure we'll have many follow-ups to come. But just for the listeners out there, is there anywhere specific that our audience can find you on social? Johnny, I'll start with you.
Yeah, you can always find me on Twitter at Recursive Funk. That's Funk with a K, or my website is recursivefunk.io.
Cool. Becca?
I'm just on LinkedIn. You can find me, Rebecca Moran, on LinkedIn.
The smart way to go.
There you go.
Cool. We'll put that in the show notes. Well, thanks again for hanging out with us, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.